Good afternoon, this is Puppy from Puppy's Toy Box, and I got a recent email about somebody asking about whether or not he should lead load a whip for BDSM in general, and when is it good for the whip, when is it bad for the whip, and when is it good for the subject, and when is it bad for the subject. And the thing is that from a BDSM standpoint, lead loading isn't going to necessarily affect how intense the whip is for the bottom. If you have your technique down, if you aren't like muscling it, if you aren't cutting in too close, it's not going to make a difference as far as how bad the whip is going to cut. If you're really like throwing it really hard, like you're trying to crack it onto somebody, then the chance of it actually causing lacerations and causing some major, cutting into the person, then that's more about your technique than it is about whether or not the whip is lead loaded or not. So if you think about, depending on the type of whip it is, like a snake whip, the lead loading is going to put more weight towards the butt end of the whip, which is going to make it easier to crack, especially if it doesn't, since it doesn't have a handle in a snake whip. It's flexible all the way through. You don't have that extra leverage to make it easier to crack, and so lead loading is very common for snake whips, where it's less common for bull whips, and almost unheard of for stock whips, right? I did make a stock whip when I was very new to this that had lead load in the actual whip itself and section. And the thing is that it always it felt like it really, really wanted to fly out of my hand. And so really if you're going to have lead load, you're going to have it as close to the hand as possible, at least heaviest in that area, with one exception that I may or may not get to today. So when does it actually harm the whip? Well, I want to first read you from page, I've lost it already, 51 in Ron Edwards' How to Make Whips, which this is the book that every single whip maker in the world has, and it's one of like two books that actually covers whip making and the how-tos of whip making. There's one out there that covers predominantly just nylon whip. This is all leather. You can look through David Morgan's book, but this one doesn't really cover a whole lot of the actual how-tos and any subjective of what actually makes a whip function better. There's a little bit on lead loading in here, when you would want to do it and how you'd want to do it, but it's I don't think it's as short and sweet as this one is on the subject, and it's not covered at all in either the Bruce Grant or the Braiding Fine Leather Morgan book. So this is what Ron Edwards has to say about it. Is, in the old days, lead loading was all the rage, but many whip makers today think that it slows down the whip and that a loaded whip will not crack as well as an unloaded whip. And then it goes into the details of how to do it. So, I mean, that's kind of generally true. And if you look at, there's some videos out there that are made by Adam Winrich and a couple other whip makers that go over, how they make whips. And you'll notice that a lot of times they don't put lead shot in them. And there actually is very little out there on how to lead load. So the reason for that is because it's mostly a popular thing among whip crackers that don't do like sports cracking and that type of thing. Like, I see it a lot in the leather community where they absolutely insist that every whip has to be lead loaded. It makes it easier to crack, it makes the whip function better, and that's simply not the case. There's people that say, well, you don't want to have rawhide because it takes forever to break in. Well, you don't have to necessarily use rawhide. A lot of times when I do a unloaded whip, I'll just use kangaroo, or I'll use latigo or something like that, and I'll braid it down. Or I'll twist it, and that actually will change the way the whip throws quite a bit. And I actually sometimes like a twisted core over a braided core sometimes. And so when does it actually harm the whip, and it has to do with how the lead shot is put in. I believe it was Peter Thorndike, but don't quote me on that, who was having a conversation with me online about lead loading and his process to doing it, and he recommends, putting certain types of glue. He recommended a contact adhesive into the lead shot to prevent it from shifting. And so when you think about it, you have forces that are always being enacted on the whip. The whip actually, over time, is going to lengthen, it's going to stretch because of all the times that you're throwing it, all that force is going from handle to tip, and leather is a stretchy material. So the shape of the shot bag is going to change over time, and the lead shot's going to move further down the whip. And sometimes when it does this, it's going to happen in an uneven manner, so you're going to get this bunching up down the whip where you're going to get a spot that just suddenly gets a kink in it because of the lead shot shifting. So putting glue in there, sometimes can help. The question is how do you do that? I have experimented around quite a bit with different contact adhesives and super glues and whatnot, and I've gone through trying to inject the shot bag with it using needles and a syringe. That doesn't work very well. You can pour glue in, but if you're thinking, you've got a shot bag that's this long, that's 2 or 3 feet long, you're trying to get glue all the way down there and then start to fill in shot. And what happens is, like, if you have a glue that's at all sticky, your lead shot's not going to get down where you need to. You're going to have trouble compacting it. So you're going to basically create the problems that you would normally have with lead shot over time, creating pressure gaps in the core of your whip where there's no structure, and then your braiding becomes loose in those sections and you get a limp spot. So that kind of happens over time, but when you use glues, a lot of times it's going to create that. So you have to be very finessed about how you insert the glues. I do find that brushing the inside of your shot bag with glue before you start letting that dry, it will make it smoother so that the lead shot slides down easier, but that doesn't fix the overall problem in the end. Other things that I will do, because I still will use glues, especially in the butt end, because that's where you're most likely to get that gap, is near where the hand meets, especially on a snake whip or near the transition on a bullwhip. Those areas are where it's going to really be the most impactful. So that's where I will actually, put in lead shot or put in glue. And what I'll also do is I'll bind, about 8 inches down from that up to the handle. I'll bind that really tight, and what that does is it creates more grippiness in that section so that the shot can't slip down as easily. So it kind of makes it so that it's going to be a problem later down the road. It's going to last longer for you, but it's not a definitive solution. So, when it comes to lead loading, is it better or worse to lead load a whip? Well, it kind of depends. I haven't had any issues, and nobody's ever complained about the kangaroo whips that I've done, but with, I had my calf welting ball for a while, and I've since removed that from my shop because I'm finding with the ones that I've used, the lead shot does shift more than I want it to. So I'm not willing to have that anymore. But my kangaroo bullwhip that is lead loaded that I've had it for about 10 years now, that I made it, I've never had much of an issue with that. So can it hurt a whip to lead load it? Absolutely. And especially if you were muscling the whip and you're putting a lot of punchy power into it, that's going to shift that shot stack faster. So yes, that is something that you should be concerned about. Does lead loading help that much? Is it worth the risk? Well, I think that if you have an all leather whip that has no lead in it whatsoever, you're probably going to have a product that's going to last you a lot longer and is going to be lighter in your hand and is actually going to move faster, in my opinion. Will I make you a lead loaded whip? Absolutely. It's just one of those things that I think that in a lot of ways, lead loading creates more problems than it solves. So hopefully this answers that question. Hopefully that helps quite a bit. And if you guys have future questions, don't hesitate to go ahead and message me. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Play safe.